I was listening to a podcast between two very experienced practitioners, one from New Zealand and one from Australia. And what struck me was how, even though there was talk about invitational language and the way that they ask questions of people, the underlying tone is one of an imposition of a program on a person. And I suppose what that presupposes is that the man or the person um, doesn't see violence as a problem and that they don't really want to change it. Um, and I think that's a false assumption, at least from hundreds of conversations that I've had with men. They they actually don't know what to do. They don't know anything else but violence as a way to solve problems in their lives. And that's because from very young, that's how they were trained. And it's that we need to consider right through from the engagement approach through the program to the closure phases, is that people use violence from a trauma based reaction. So this is the limbic system going into high alert of danger, and the body reacts before any thinking is available from the central executive function. And so this makes CBT approaches somehow redundant with this population because they just don't have access to cognition in those moments. And they have to learn things which involve practice and understanding and being able to even recognize what they're feeling, because most of them would recognize anger, but hardly any of them would recognize fear, because that is the emotion most submerged in men. And our current approaches firstly do not address the man as a intelligent human being who actually wants to be free of this kind of way of living. You know, there will be people that are frightened of the alternative to their life that they currently live, but they are probably the most severely damaged of the population. So that's one aspect of the conversation that struck me was when you approach someone as a fellow human being and you don't impose something on them, you have a much greater chance of a buy-in. And even though these approaches use motivational interviewing, the strong flavour of almost all of these programs is imposition. An imposition that you're a naughty person or you're a bad person for doing this, and shame on you. All things that replicate trauma. The second part of what struck me and has struck me for many years is the lack of responsivity from programs and from facilitators to the actual needs of these men. So if we take the approach that trauma is at the base, really any responsive program has to deal with that first. Any responsive facilitator has to take that into account in how they interact with the participants. And what we know about trauma is there is someone that with more power that abuses someone with less power. And as facilitators, we have power, and how we approach the participants in our head actually can replicate that trauma response, and certainly not open up the possibility of learning. And a big part of responsivity is to addressing this trauma response, this automatic nervous system, which is the body's natural way of protecting little children who really have no power, and will do what they can to appease an abuser. And in many of these boys' homes and foster homes, the abuser would encourage violence amongst the children. And so we have a very ingrained response that unless we deal with that, we are not helping people to not reoffend. And not only that, we are not helping people to have good lives. And they probably have more entitlement than the rest of us to have a good life because they've started from such shit beginnings. So an essential part of that is emotional management. And this is something that is not trained for in facilitators and psychologists and psychiatrists and counsellors. Emotions have been hands off in our culture, and we pay the price for it. What I discovered through these 3 years in the prison working with these men was that it's very possible to work with a group of men who, from different gang backgrounds, but to me as facilitator to create and maintain a culture in the group which is very different from what they've experienced before. And that culture includes respect and inclusion and learning and all of these things. But it is my responsibility to, in a way, especially at the beginning, to police that, because there's so much in our culture where in the wider culture, where we tolerate put downs, we tolerate bullying. You only have to have looked at that situation between Will Smith and Chris, whoever, at the awards. Like, there's a great toleration for that mockery of Will Smith's wife, and a great condemnation of Will Smith slapping Chris, whatever. In a culture, in a group culture, people have to feel safe to express themselves, to be vulnerable, because that is the only healthy way for people to deal with conflict or difficult situations. So this is a very radical approach to what we have known, and many facilitators maybe are not going to be up for that. But I think in the field there are a lot of very dedicated people who really want to help their clients and who are genuine about developing their own practice. And I suppose it's to you that I'm offering this training, and my insider experience of trauma as a child has informed my way of engagement and the way of operating in the group. But even then, it's still what I learnt through those groups is that as facilitator, it's not my job to actually run the group. It's as facilitator, you create the culture, and the men learn to pro-socially create relationships with each other, and through that learn how to manage trauma reactions, learn about themselves, learn how they're seen by others, all this kind of thing. Okay, so there's some writing about the program, there's some writing about my background and the theory on the website yinchimoon.com, and I hope that some of you will heed the call for a radical approach to support your clients to the kind of life that they are entitled, as we all are, to thrive and to be at peace. Okay, I hope to see some of you there.